Hello friends, juniors and PG aspirants. I am Dr. Akash Shaha, MBBS from Medical College Kolkata, currently preparing for medical postgraduate examinations. We all know it's a very hard time for all of us because the exams are getting postponed and waves after waves of COVID-19 is coming. Now, this is not a motivational or any myth busting video. COVID 19 does not need any introduction, and needless to say, it's an important topic for all of us too. But the knowledge and evidence revolving this entity is just the tip of an iceberg. As a medical postgraduate aspirant, we can just expect 4 or 5 MCQs, but whenever we take up the challenge to gather some relevant information regarding the topic, some new guideline pops up with some new explanations. Though almost all the platforms have made videos, provided tests and Q banks to make us updated all the time, I have just compiled all our national important guidelines till first week of July and some basic facts and information of COVID-19 in the form of a handwritten note that's composed of just 21 big pages. For our ease to understand it, I will be just reading through the pages of my notes, and pardon me for some technical glitches and not so good a sound or video quality because this is my first lecture kind of video recorded at home with some basic tools. So let's start. So first of all, the virus. We all know that the virus is enveloped with helically symmetrical nucleocapsid. It is also the largest known RNA virus. The genome is non-segmented. Remember, non-segmented, positive sense, single-stranded RNA. And it also belongs to beta coronavirus of Coronaviridae family. Now, this Coronaviridae family consists of alpha, beta, gamma, and delta coronaviruses. But it is important to know that these alpha, beta, gamma, and delta is not synonymous with all the strains of alpha, beta, gamma, and delta of COVID-19. These are separate. Now, our main attention is beta coronavirus, which has got two lineages, lineage A and B. Lineage A contains HCOV OC43, which is the most common strain, HCOV HKU1. HCOV means human coronavirus. Lineage B consists of SARS-CoV and this SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. This SARS-CoV is responsible for the outbreak in 2003. Now coming to these SARS-CoV strains, after the emergence of COVID-19, we first got this UK variant, which was alpha, that is B.1.7. Then South African variant, which is beta, B.1.351. Brazil variant, that is gamma, and it is P.1. Then the latest double mutant variant, that is delta variant or delta strain, responsible for the second wave in our country, which is B.1.617.2. And also there is a new triple mutant or Bengal strain, which is B.1.618. Now also currently we came across that another lambda variant has already spreaded with more transmissibility in across 30 countries around the world. So it's also coming in near future. Coming to life cycle of the virus and pathogenesis of the disease. The virus enters the host cell by spike protein. So this spike protein determines the virus virulence, tissue tropism, and host specificity. This spike protein has got two subunits, S1 and S2. The S1 subunit binds to ACE2 receptors on host cell surface. These ACE2 receptors are present on type 2 pneumocytes of lung, also in our GI tract, also in the endothelium of blood vessels. And also remember, this S2 subunit is responsible for the fusion of viral and host cell membranes, and it does so by using the TMPRSS2 of the host cell, that is transmembrane protease serine type 2. Then the virus is endocytosed and enters into the endosome. The acidic pH of the endosome helps in uncoating of the virus, and now the genetic material or genome is present in the host cell cytosol. Then replication with the help of RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, and then assembly by protease, then exocytosis, and then new cells are infected. Now during this, our immune system gets activated, and there will be release of inflammatory markers like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and TNF alpha. These inflammatory markers, if these inflammatory markers are responsible for cytokine storm. Also, this cytokine storm and cellular debris and infected epithelial cells responsible for lung injury leading to ARDS. This cytokine storm is also responsible for imbalance of anticoagulants and procoagulants, resulting into micro or macrovascular thrombosis, which can lead to death ultimately. Now, in this life cycle of virus and the pathogenesis of the disease, we can discuss site of action of the drugs available, approved, and also discarded. Now, this is the virus, and this is the spike protein. This is the host cell membrane. This is the host cell membrane, and it has got ACE2 and TMPRSS2. We can inhibit this spike protein by bamlanivimab and the combination of casirivimab plus imedivimab. We all know that this combination is popularly known as antibody cocktail. We will learn some more facts about this later. Also, we can make the pH of the endosome basic by hydroxychloroquine. We can inhibit this RNA-dependent RNA polymerase by remdesivir and favipiravir. Also, we can inhibit the assembly of the virion particles by protease inhibitors like lopinavir, ritonavir. Also, we can inhibit the cytokine storm by giving steroids. We can also inhibit interleukin 6 by tocilizumab. We can also inhibit the micro or macrovascular thrombosis by unfractionated or low molecular weight heparin. Coming to epidemiology, COVID-19 was declared a public health emergency of international concern on 30th Jan 2020 and as a pandemic on 11th March of 2020. Remember, it is a type of propagated epidemic. The natural reservoir is horseshoe bats or the genus Rhinolopus. The possible intermediate hosts are civets or raccoon dogs. The transmission can be direct or indirect. The direct mode of transmission is droplet transmission, droplet of size 5 to 10 micron. Also, the indirect mode of transmission can be droplet nuclei, which are nothing but dried residues of droplets generated by evaporation of the droplet. It can travel a bit more. It's less than 5 micron. Also, fomite transmission is a big concern. The virus can survive upon aluminium, copper up to 8 hours, upon cardboard up to 24 hours, plastic and steel 1 to 3 days, wood and glass 5 days, and maximum in the outer side of surgical mask for 7 days. Also, the viable SARS-CoV-2 can be detected in aerosol up to 3 hours after aerosolization. Now coming to 4 important epidemiological terms. The first one is, we all know, incubation period of the disease, which is 1 to 14 days, or we can say 2 to 14 days. The median incubation period is 4 to 6 days, or very specifically 5.1 days. Coming to period of infectivity, it is 2 days before onset of symptoms up to 8 days after onset of symptoms. Then R0 or basic reproduction rate is 1.379, which means that one infected person can further transmit the disease to at least 1.379% or 1.38%. And then comes the series interval, which is 5 to 7.5 days. That means from symptom onset of patient 1 to symptom onset of patient 2. Histopathological changes in lungs. Most common histopathological changes is diffuse alveolar damage, which is due to endothelialitis. It's an already asked question. The other histopathological changes are hyaline membrane formation, desquamation of pneumocytes, fibrin deposition in lungs, and inflammation with mononuclear cells. Also, the CT chest findings most common: ground glass opacities with or without consolidation, GGO. Also, there can be interlobular septal thickenings, air bronchograms, reverse halo sign or atoll sign, crazy pavement pattern, organizing pneumonia-like pattern. Now, based on these CT chest findings, we can tell the probability, or we can suggest the probability of having the disease. CORADS 1 means no, normal or non-infectious abnormalities. 2, low, infectious abnormalities but not COVID-19. 3 is intermediate, unclear whether COVID-19 is present or not. 4 is high, abnormalities suspicious for COVID-19. 5 is very high, typical COVID-19. And 6 is RT-PCR, positive or lab confirmed case. Now coming to case definitions, which was given by MOHFW, we are three kinds of cases: suspect case, probable case, and confirmed case. Now coming to suspect case. Suspect case can be of two types. Number one, a patient with severe acute respiratory illness. Severe acute respiratory illness, or SARI, means acute respiratory infection with history of fever more than equal to 38 degrees Celsius and cough with onset within last 10 days requiring hospitalization. And the second type, a person who meets both clinical and epidemiological criteria. Both clinical and epidemiological criteria. Now, what are the clinical criteria? Clinical criteria are acute onset of fever and cough, or acute onset of any three or more of the following symptoms like fever, cough, coryza, fatigue, headache, myalgia, sore throat, dyspnea, diarrhea, anorexia, nausea, vomiting, altered mental status. Epidemiological criteria means residing or working in an area with high risk of transmission of virus, or residing or travel to an area with high community transmission, or working in any healthcare setting anytime within 14 days prior to symptom onset. 14 days prior to symptom onset. Probable case can be of four types. Number one, a patient who meets the clinical criteria above and is a contact of probable or confirmed case or linked to COVID-19 cluster. Secondly, a suspect case with chest imaging showing findings suggestive of COVID-19. Third, a person with recent onset of anosmia or ageusia in the absence of any other identifiable cause. So anosmia, ageusia, probable case, they are not included in the symptoms of suspect case. Fourth is death not otherwise explained in an adult with respiratory distress preceding death and was a contact of probable or confirmed case or linked to a COVID-19 cluster. Confirmed case means a person with positive NAT, including RT-PCR or any other similar test approved by ICMR. So it has to be RT-PCR. If the person is rapid antigen test positive, he or she have to meet either the probable case definition or suspect criteria. And an asymptomatic person with a positive rapid antigen test who is a contact of a probable or confirmed case. Remember a point that anosmia has been shown to increase the pre-test probability of presence of SARS-CoV-2. Now coming to high-risk contacts. There are some criteria of being called as high-risk contacts. Direct contact with the body of the patient without proper PPE, touching the body fluids of patient, touching or cleaning the linens, clothes or dishes of the patient, living in the same household, in close proximity with symptomatic patient with precautions for 6 hours, and coming within 1 meter of the patient without precautions or mask. These are called as high-risk contacts. Now we have to diagnose COVID-19, so we have to collect the specimen. The samples can be combined throat and nasal swabs, oropharyngeal swab, nasopharyngeal swab, bronchoalveolar lavage, endotracheal aspirate. During specimen collection by swab, the head of the patient should be tilted back or extended at 70 degree. In case of combined throat and nasal swab, place both the swabs in the same tube In case of oropharyngeal swab, avoid touching the tongue, teeth and gums. In case of nasopharyngeal swab, insert the swab through the nares parallel to palate until resistance is encountered. Remember to use synthetic fiber flexible swab with plastic shaft. Avoid calcium alginate swabs and swabs with wooden shaft. And for specimen collection, use PPE, restricted entry to visitors, proper disposal of all wastes, and complete requisition form for each specimen. Regarding transport and storage of specimen, the temperature should be 2 to 8 degrees Celsius or 4 degrees Celsius as ICMR has said it. The viral transport medium is nothing but Hank's balanced salt solution with gentamicin and amphotericin B. If a delay in testing is expected, the storing temperature should be minus 70 degrees Celsius and not 4 degree. And what do you mean by delay? For serum, nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal swabs, the delay can be 5 days. For tissue biopsy and autopsy, it is 24 hours. For sputum, tracheal aspirate and bronchoalveolar lavage, it is 48 hours. And laboratory requirements for specimen handling, for molecular testing, it is BSL-2, biosafety level 2. For culture and vaccine work, it is BSL-3. For culture and vaccine work, it is BSL-3. Now coming to the investigations. We all know about the rapid antigen test. Coming to the gold standard test, that is RT-PCR, reverse transcript test, polymerase chain reaction. And the genes targeted are RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. It is the most common gene targeted in RT-PCR. Then genes for structural proteins like E and N, E for envelope, N for nucleocapsid, and ORF1A and 1B, that is open reading frame 1A, 1B. Also there are CBNAT like TrueNAT or Cepheid Expert Express SARS-CoV-2. Also there are antibody testing, but these antibody testing are for serosurveillance of population. The ELISA in India is known as COVID Kavach ELISA. It is for serosurveillance. Then our very favorite Feluda. Feluda is based on CRISPR-Cas9 technology. It is FNCA S9 editor limited uniform detection assay. It is a paper-based COVID-19 test kit and it can detect viral genetic material within 45 minutes. Now we all know that ICMR has recently approved CoviSelf, a nasal swab RAT for home testing, and it is advised in symptomatic individuals and immediate contacts of lab confirmed positive cases. Now coming to testing strategies as proposed by ICMR, all individuals who wish to get themselves tested can voluntarily subject themselves to test. That means testing on demand is available. Screening should be done in all asymptomatic and symptomatic direct or high risk contacts. Testing should be done in hospital setting in all symptomatic patient, all symptomatic neonates, all patients with severe acute respiratory infections, all pregnant women hospitalized for delivery, asymptomatic high risk patients, and patients with atypical or extrapulmonary manifestations. Negative rapid antigen test in a symptomatic individual or symptoms develop following a negative rapid antigen test. Repeat RT-PCR should be done. Now there are several tools that monitor relevant mutations in SARS-CoV-2. These are Primer Check, Primer Scan, GI-SAID and CoV Glue. Remember, pooled RT-PCR can be done in case of migrant workers. Now there are some common lab abnormalities which can be seen in a COVID-19 affected patient. The most common being lymphopenia. Also there may be mild thrombocytopenia. The inflammatory markers can be raised like increased CRP, increased ESR, increased ferritin, increased interleukin 6. Remember that increased interleukin 6 indicates the interleukin 6 per se indicates the risk of mortality. Glycosylated ferritin is one thing which will be decreased. Also there are increased D-dimers, increased fibrinogen, increased PT, increased APDT, and also increased liver enzymes. Chest X-ray interpretation and reporting. First one is normal, no finding on chest X-ray, but COVID-19 not excluded. The classic or probable, the classic description is lower lobe and peripheral predominant multiple bilateral areas of infiltrates or ground glass opacities with or without consolidation. Remember that a lower lobe peripheral predominant. Non-COVID-19 means some other features like pneumothorax, lobar pneumonia, pleural effusion, pulmonary edema, and indeterminate. It's indeterminate. It means it does not fit the classic or non-COVID descriptions. Coming to extra pulmonary manifestations or atypical manifestations of COVID-19. Neurologic can be headache, stroke, GBS, encephalopathy, anosmia, ageusia. Cardiac can be MI, myocarditis, cardiomyopathy, arrhythmia, and cardiogenic shock. Thromboembolism like DVT, pulmonary embolism, renal, AKI, COVAN, and hematuria. COVAN means COVID-associated nephropathy. GI, anorexia, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Endocrine is hyperglycemia, or if the patient is diabetic, there can be diabetic ketoacidosis. Coming to dermatologic manifestations, the most common is morbilliform or maculopapular rash, erythematous rash. Also, there can be pseudochilblains or COVID toes, livedo-reticularis, and urticaria. Ocular manifestation most common is conjunctivitis. Remember, prefer PCM for symptomatic relief, avoid oral ibuprofen. COVID, we already know it is COVID-associated nephropathy characterized by collapsing glomerulopathy with microcystic tubular dilatation and injury, and ApoL1 gene increases its risk. What is refractory COVID? Cases that fail to achieve clinical and radiological remission after 10 days of hospitalization. Poor outcome is seen in male underlying comorbidities, patients with anorexia, and no fever at admission. Then post-COVID sequelae, it is one of the hot topics for exam, post-COVID sequelae. The most common post-COVID sequelae is pulmonary fibrosis. Also, there can be cardiomyopathy, arrhythmias. Neurologic sequelae can be olfactory and gustatory dysfunction, critical illness-related encephalopathy and ischemic stroke. Neuropsychiatric, post-COVID depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. These are very common nowadays, and there are also vascular complications. Coming to prevention strategies, first of all, we all know what is the difference between quarantine and isolation. Quarantine is for healthy persons, and now the duration of home quarantine is 14 days. Isolation is for sick persons, and duration of home isolation is 10 days after onset of symptoms or date of sampling in case of asymptomatic, or no fever for 3 days. No need for retesting after home isolation is over. Eligibility for home isolation is clinically assigned as mild case or asymptomatic case. Facility for self-isolation and for quarantine of family contacts is available. Caregiver is available on a 24/7 basis. And the patient must monitor his health regularly, that is every 4 hourly, and he has to monitor his SpO2, oxygen saturation by pulse oximeter, respiratory rate, pulse rate, blood pressure. If he or she has shortness of breath or some malaise or body ache. The patient undergoing home isolation should seek medical help if he or she develops difficulty in breathing, dip in SpO2 that is less than 94% on room air, persistent chest pain, mental confusion, or high-grade fever or cough for more than 5 days. High-grade. Instructions for patients undergoing home isolation. The patient should be kept in a well-ventilated room with cross ventilation, number 1. The patient should use a triple-layer surgical mask at all times and discard the mask after 8 hours of use, or if the mask is soiled, after disinfecting it with 1% sodium hypochlorite. Frequent hand washing with soap and water for 40 seconds or clean with alcohol-based sanitizer. Also, for asymptomatic and mild symptomatic patients undergoing home isolation, the 6-minute walk test is also recommended. We will learn about it 5 minutes later. 6-minute walk test. Coming to disinfection, 1% sodium hypochlorite solution is recommended. 70% isopropyl or ethyl alcohol can also be used. The solution should be prepared fresh, and a contact time of at least 10 minutes is recommended. Also, the personal protective equipments or PPE, there is a sequence of donning and doffing. As per our Government of India guidelines, the putting on a sequence is hand hygiene, followed by first pair of gloves, then put on the coverall, then shoe cover, then the mask and hood, then face shield or goggles, and then second pair of gloves. The doffing sequence is first remove the shoe cover, then the outer gloves, then remove face shield or goggles, hood, coverall, inner gloves and mask. However, the CDC guidelines, which was already asked in AIMS, is a bit simple. The putting on sequence is first gown, then mask, then goggles or face shield, and then gloves. The removing can be divided into two types. One can remove the PPE, first gloves, then goggles, then gown, then mask, or gown and gloves together, then goggles, then mask. So this particular sequence was asked in AIMS, and gloves, goggles, gown, mask, just go by alphabetically and you will get the answer. Coming to the biomedical waste management. Now, this biomedical waste management, there is one biomedical waste and there is one general solid waste. So there is solid waste management and there is biomedical waste management. Inside this solid waste, the solid waste consists of leftover food or food plates of the patient, used water bottles and fruit peel-offs. The wet and dry solid waste bags should be tied securely and sprayed with sodium hypochlorite solution before handing over. Now in COVID ward or hospital, the BMW management is categorized as yellow, red, white and blue. We all know the red category contains all the plastics like goggles, face shield, plastic coverall. The yellow category contains used masks of health staff and patient, tissues and diapers of the patient, the head cover, the shoe cover, the linen gown and also non-plastic coverall. And then white category for sharps and metals, blue category for glass and broken ampoules. Now, in case of COVID care center or quarantine camps or home isolation facility, the solid waste management is same as above. But there is no categorization of biomedical waste like yellow, red, white and blue. So all the biomedical waste management, everything goes in yellow bags. So there is a confusion, but remember this: yellow, red, blue and white category. Red for all plastics. Next, vaccines. There are various types of vaccine. First one is non-replicating viral vector, and in the non-replicating viral vector, most commonly used vector is adenovirus. The examples of non-replicating viral vector vaccines are Covishield. It has 2 doses with a gap of 12 to 16 weeks or 3 to 4 months as of now. Second one, Sputnik V, then Johnson & Johnson, and coming soon in India, Bharat Biotech nasal vaccine. The inactivated or killed vaccine is our Covaxin developed by Bharat Biotech. It has also 2 doses with a gap of 4 to 6 weeks. The mRNA based vaccines are Pfizer, Moderna and coming soon is Genova, because the other two Pfizer and Moderna vaccines should be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius. However, the Genova vaccine can be kept in 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Plasmid DNA based vaccine is Zydus Cadila. Protein subunit based vaccine is Novavax, and coming soon BioE subunit vaccine. Remember this aim. So mRNA Moderna, DNA D Zydus Cadila, protein subunit protein N Novavax. There are some vaccine related recommendations by NECVAC that COVID-19 vaccination to be deferred by 3 months after recovery from COVID-19 disease. If you have got COVID, then after 3 months, after 3 months of recovery, you should get the vaccine. Now, if infected with COVID after first dose, the second dose to be deferred by 3 months after clinical recovery from illness. So again 3 months. Now, persons with any other serious general illness requiring hospitalization or ICU care should wait for 4 to 8 weeks before getting this COVID-19 vaccine. So if you have got COVID and you have to be admitted to ICU, then after 3 months. But suppose you have been admitted to ICU due to some other problems like MI or stroke, you should also wait for 4 to 8 weeks. No screening of vaccine recipients by rapid antigen test needed prior to vaccination. COVID-19 vaccination is recommended for pregnant and lactating females. The latest guideline by WHO on 2nd of July is the operational guidelines for vaccination of pregnant females. So it has now been recommended. An individual can donate blood after 14 days of either receipt of COVID-19 vaccine or testing RT-PCR negative if suffering from the disease itself. Also remember, a person should receive COVID-19 vaccination at least 3 months after hematopoietic stem cell transplantation or cellular therapy. And COVID-19 vaccine should be prioritized over other vaccines. 14 days, a gap of 14 days are recommended between the COVID-19 vaccine and other approved vaccine. If rabies vaccine is indicated, it should be prioritized and taken as per schedule. But the neonatal or infant immunization policy should continue as scheduled. Now coming to this management part, the guidelines are changing every day, almost every day. Now currently the mild disease is upper respiratory tract symptoms and or fever without shortness of breath or hypoxia. For them, home isolation or COVID care center. What should I do? Symptomatic management like hydration, antipyretics, antitussive, multivitamins, and inhalational budesonide by meter dose inhaler or dry powder inhaler, 800 microgram BD for 5 days if symptoms are persistent beyond 5 days. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, all are removed from the guideline or treatment protocol. Now here comes the utility of 6-minute walk test. It is for asymptomatic and mild symptomatic cases. It is a simple clinical test to assess cardiopulmonary exercise tolerance and also to unmask hypoxia. So what you have to do? Patient with pulse oximeter attached to his finger is asked to walk in the confines of his room for 6 minutes continuously. Any drop in SpO2 below 94% or an absolute drop of more than 3 to 5% or feeling unwell while performing the test or at the end of the test, you should be declared as positive for 6-minute walk test. And if you have declared positive for 6-minute walk test, you should consult a doctor or you should get admitted to a hospital. This 6-minute walk test is contraindicated in moderate to severe disease. You cannot do that. Age more than 70 years, uncontrolled asthma and pregnancy. Remember, the high-risk patients, you can do COVID-19 test in hospital setting in high-risk patients, asymptomatic high-risk patients. So the high-risk factors for severe disease or mortality are age more than 60 years, diabetes mellitus and other immunocompromised states, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, coronary artery disease, obesity, cerebrovascular disease, chronic lung, kidney, liver disease. And so these patients shall only be allowed home isolation after proper evaluation by the treating physician. What do you mean by moderate disease or moderate COVID-19? Respiratory rate more than equal to 24 per minute with breathlessness, SpO2 90 to 93% on room air, admit in ward or DCHC, dedicated COVID health center. Remember, the target SpO2 is 92 to 95% only, that is +2 +2. In patients with COPD, maintain the SpO2 within 88 to 92%. The preferred device for oxygenation is non-rebreathing face mask. Awake proning is encouraged in all patients requiring supplemental oxygen therapy. Then injection methylprednisolone 0.5 to 1 mg per kg body weight in 2 divided doses for 5 to 10 days. And start steroids if SpO2 falls below 92%. You can use methylprednisolone or equivalent dose of dexamethasone. Then prophylactic anticoagulant therapy by low molecular weight heparin like enoxaparin 0.5 mg per kg OD. Injection remdesivir can be given. Monitoring serial chest X-ray or high resolution CT scan of chest to be done only if there is worsening of the condition. CBC, KFT, LFT 24 to 48 hourly. CRP D-dimer 48 to 72 hourly. And interleukin 6 if deteriorating. It is subject to availability. So 48 hourly, 72 hourly. Coming to severe disease, respiratory rate more than 30 per minute with breathlessness, and SpO2 less than 90% on room air. Admit in ICU of dedicated COVID hospital. First is respiratory support. Now, target SpO2 is more than equal to 90%, but in case of pregnancy, the target SpO2 should be 92 to 96%. Consider high flow nasal cannula. Consider use of NIV, that is helmet or face mask, if work of breathing is low. Intubation is prioritized if high work of breathing or NIV not tolerated. Use conventional ARDS NET protocol for ventilatory management. Injection methylprednisolone, the dose is increased 1 to 2 mg per kg in 2 divided doses for 5 to 10 days. So the duration is same. The anticoagulant dose, that is 0.5 mg per kg OD subcut, is same. Injection tocilizumab or remdesivir can be considered. Maintain euvolemia if sepsis or septic shock, manage as per existing protocol. Monitoring serial chest X-ray, HRCT, interleukin 6 if condition is worsening. CBC, KFT, LFT daily, and CRP D-dimer 48 hourly. Now, what are the discharge policies? Moderate case, fever resolved within, there are two kinds of patients. Fever resolved within 3 days and SpO2 maintained without support, discharge after 10 days of symptom onset. If symptom not resolved and oxygen therapy continues, then discharge only after resolution of symptoms and ability to maintain SpO2 for 3 consecutive days. Remember, for moderate case, there is no need for retesting, and after discharge, home isolation and self-monitoring for further 7 days is recommended. In case of severe case, discharge only after clinical recovery and the patient tested negative once by RT-PCR. So for severe case, retesting by RT-PCR is recommended. Now coming to individual mode of management, first one is awake proning. So what are the guidelines regarding awake proning? 1 pillow below one pillow below neck, 1 or 2 pillows below chest through upper thighs, and 2 pillows below shin. In each position, you should continue for 30 minutes. However, the upper limit is 120 minutes. First is prone, then move to right side, then sit up, then left side, and then repeat. So prone, right side, sit up, left side. It can be done up to 16 hours a day in multiple cycles as felt comfortable. But it should be avoided in hemodynamic instability, for 1 hour after meals, of course in pregnancy, in DVT, in heart disease, and unstable or fracture of hip, of spine, femur, pelvis. Now, some lung protective ventilation strategies are: tidal volume should be 6 ml per kg, not more than 8. PEEP should be 5 to 15 centimeter of water. RR should be 15 to 35 per minute. Target plateau pressure should be less than 30 centimeter of water. Target SpO2 88 to 95%, and target PaO2 is 55 to 80 millimeter of mercury. Now, the open suctioning of respiratory tract, bronchoscopy, CPR, NIV, intubation, extubation, manual ventilation, all these procedures are aerosol generating procedures. Now, hydroxychloroquine is still there, but now it is not recommended for mild cases. Now, contraindications are, the previous contraindications as discussed are severe disease, history of unexplained syncope, QT interval more than 480 millisecond, and underlying cardiac disease. Coming to remdesivir, it inhibits RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. Now here are 2 catch points. The adaptive COVID-19 treatment trial said that remdesivir is useful in cases of COVID-19 with SpO2 less than equal to 94% on room air. However, the WHO Solidarity trial said that remdesivir had little or no effect on hospitalized patients, as indicated by overall mortality, initiation of ventilation, and duration of hospital stay. In India, it is a reserved drug approved under emergency use authorization. So it may be considered only in moderate to severe COVID disease, requiring supplemental oxygen, and no renal or hepatic dysfunction, and within 10 days of symptom onset. Contraindications: liver dysfunction, AST or ALT more than 5 times normal, GFR less than 30 ml per minute per square meter, pregnancy lactation, age less than 12 years. The dose is 200 mg IV on day 1, followed by 100 mg IV OD for next 4 days. So it's a 5-day schedule. Tocilizumab, off-label use only if all the below criteria are met. Number 1, presence of severe disease, preferably within 24 to 48 hours of onset of severe disease or ICU admission. Significantly raised inflammatory markers, that is CRP or interleukin 6, not improving despite use of steroids. No active bacterial, fungal, tubercular infection or HIV or hepatitis. The dose is single dose 4 to 6 mg per kg in 100 ml NS over 1 hour. Coming to some new drugs, antibody cocktail, that is casirivimab plus imdevimab. They are IgG1 monoclonal antibodies directed against the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, and its use in India has been provided emergency use authorization. Dose 600 mg plus 600 mg IV infusion or subcut, indicated in mild to moderate disease with high risk of developing severe disease in more than equal to 12 years of age and more than 40 kg of body weight, not requiring oxygen. Another drug, 2-deoxy-D-glucose. It is an analog of glucose. That selectively accumulates in infected cells, stops viral synthesis and energy production, and arrests viral growth. So it's an anti-metabolite. It's developed by DRDO and approved for emergency use authorization by DCGI in moderate to severe disease. And it is the first indigenous COVID-19 anti-COVID drug. It has been reported to reduce the average disease recovery time by 2.5 days and the need for supplemental oxygen by 40%. Also, Virafin or pegylated interferon alpha 2b. DCGI has approved its use in moderate COVID-19 disease. And we have said about the TMPRSS2 inhibitors, that is Camostat in Denmark under trial, Nafamostat in Germany under trial. So drugs discontinued by DGHS currently ivermectin, azithromycin, doxycycline. So no antibiotics, no prophylactic antibiotics, no prophylactic zinc, favipiravir, ivermectin, all of these are discontinued. Hydroxychloroquine you can use. Schedule the administration of methotrexate, cyclophosphamide or JAK inhibitors at least 1 week after vaccination. Dupilumab is the preferred systemic treatment for severe atopic dermatitis as it does not increase the risk of viral infection. These are some concomitant pharmacological points. About the mask, we use the most useful ornament nowadays. The N95 mask blocks 95% particles of more than 0.3 micron. And there is one FFP mask, that is filtering phase piece. There are 3 categories, 1, 2 and 3. 1, 80% aerosol filtration, has got one yellow elastic band. FFP2, 94% aerosol filtration, blue or white elastic band. And FFP3, 99% aerosol filtration and has got red elastic band. Next one is another hot topic, mucormycosis. So invasive fungal disease with average mortality rate of 54% as said by CDC. It is caused by Mucormycetes group of fungi, which includes Rhizopas, Mucor, Absidia. Remember these first 3, and Rhizopas is the most common. Mode of infection through inhalation of spores, and remember it is not contagious. Time of presentation is usually around 3rd week of onset of symptoms of COVID-19. Risk factors of mucormycosis in COVID-19 patients, number 1 and most important is uncontrolled hyperglycemia, misuse, overuse and irrational use of steroids, prolonged ICU stay, unhygienic humidifiers and irrational use of broad spectrum antibiotics, pre-existing comorbidities like hematological malignancies, use of immunosuppressants. The signs and symptoms: facial pain, pain over sinus, pain in teeth and gums, decreased sensation over face, blackish discoloration over nasolabial groove, blackish or blood tinged nasal discharge and nasal crusting, conjunctival chemosis, periorbital swelling, blurring of vision or diplopia, loosening of teeth, pale palate, escher over palate and worsening of respiratory symptoms. Diagnosis by KOH mount and microscopy or histopathology of debrided tissue. there will be ribbon-like aseptate hyphae, 5 to 15 micron thick, branching at 90 degree. Culture, but do not wait for the results to initiate therapy because mucormycosis is an emergency. Also, CT of paranasal sinus, MRI brain and CT chest can be done. Now, presence of more than 10 nodules, reverse halo sign, CT bronchus sign, pleural effusion in the CT chest is highly suggestive of mucormycosis. Coming to management, combination of surgical debridement and antifungal therapy. Now, the drug of choice is liposomal amphotericin B, always liposomal amphotericin B, 5 mg per kg body weight, 10 mg per kg in case of CNS involvement. The amphotericin B should not get in touch with light, should be diluted in 5% dextrose, given over 2 to 3 hours, continue till favorable response is achieved, followed by oral posaconazole or oral isavuconazole. Now, the therapy has to be continued until the clinical resolution of signs and symptoms as well as resolution of radiological signs of active disease and elimination of predisposing risk factors like hyperglycemia. Kidney function test and electrolytes should be monitored throughout the treatment duration. Coming to management in children, that means age group 2 months to 18 years. First one is asymptomatic. Asymptomatic means suspected contact or incidentally detected to be positive. Home isolation, nothing, just maintain hydration and nutritious diet and no medications, no investigations needed. Mild disease in a child is sore throat, rhinorrhea, cough without breathing difficulty and or of course SpO2 more than 94%. And again, home isolation or COVID care center, you can give paracetamol 15 milligram per kg body weight per dose for fever, throat soothing agents or warm saline gargles for cough, maintain hydration and nutritious diet, COVID appropriate behavior, no other medications, no antimicrobials and no investigations needed, monitoring of shortness of breath, blood pressure, respiratory rate, SpO2, pulse rate, chest indrawing, malaise and physical activity. Coming to moderate disease is fast breathing and or SpO2 90 to 93% on room air. Fast breathing means respiratory rate more than equal to 60 per minute in less than 2 months, more than equal to 50 per minute in 2 to 12 months, more than equal to 40 per minute in 1 to 5 years, more than equal to 30 per minute in more than 5 years. Admit to DCHC or COVID-19 hospital. So, give oxygen therapy if SpO2 less than 94% and maintain between 94 to 96%. Encourage oral fluids. Initiate IV fluid therapy if oral intake is poor. Paracetamol 10 to 15 milligram per kg per dose if temperature is more than 38 degrees Celsius. Antimicrobials only and only if there is evidence or strong suspicion of superadded bacterial infections. Corticosteroid only in rapidly progressive disease, and investigation just CBC, blood glucose, chest X. Coming to severe disease, SpO2 less than 90% on room air, or signs of severe pneumonia, ARDS, septic shock, MODS, or pneumonia with any of these like cyanosis, grunting, severe chest retraction, lethargy, somnolence, seizure. Admit in HDU or ICU of COVID-19 hospital and initiate immediate oxygen therapy, maintain fluid and electrolyte balance, steroids under strict supervision at the right time, in right dose and for right duration. Dexamethasone 0.15 mg per kg, maximum 6 mg once a day, or methylprednisolone maximum 30 mg once a day for 5 to 7 days and taper up to 14 days. Avoid steroids in first 3 to 5 days as it prolongs viral shedding. Again, antimicrobials only and only if there is evidence or a strong suspicion of superadded bacterial infections. Anticoagulants not indicated routinely. All hospitalized children should be investigated for thrombosis. If present, start enoxaparin 1 mg per kg BD for 12 weeks with monitoring. So this is therapeutic dose 1 mg per kg because the child has got thrombosis. But the prophylactic anticoagulant therapy, the dose is different. Now, what are the predisposing risk factors for thrombosis? History of VTE or family history of first degree relative with VTE, that is venous thromboembolic disease or episodes. burns, active malignancy, estrogen therapy, morbid obesity, severe dehydration, recent surgery or trauma, flare of inflammatory disease, central venous line. So prophylactic anticoagulant is indicated in strong personal or family history of VT or an indwelling central venous line plus more than equal to 2 additional risk factors as discussed above or more than equal to 4 additional risk factors. And the prophylactic anticoagulant therapy, the dose is 0.5 mg per kg BD till discharge. And for severe disease, the investigations are CBC, CRP, glucose, LFT, KFT, ferritin, D-dimer, and chest X-ray. Treatment of ARDS, mild HFNC or NIV, moderate to severe lung protective mechanical ventilation, and restriction of fluid. In case of treatment of shock, crystalloid fluid bolus 10 to 20 ml per kg, cautiously over 30 to 60 minutes with early epinephrine support. Start empirical antimicrobials after taking the blood culture. So in severe disease, these ARDS shock also are included. Now COVID appropriate behavior in children, that means using mask, it is not recommended in less than equal to 5 years. For 6 to 11 years may wear a mask depending on ability of the child and under supervision of the guardians. More than equal to 12 years should wear a mask just like an adult. And then another hot topic is MISC, multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. Multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. Now very clear-cut WHO diagnostic criteria are there. So children and adolescents 0 to 18 years of age with fever more than equal to 3 days and any two of the following, that is rash or bilateral non-purulent conjunctivitis or mucocutaneous inflammation signs, hypotension or shock, features of myocardial dysfunction, pericarditis, valvulitis or coronary abnormalities, including echo findings or increased troponin or NT-proBNP, evidence of coagulopathy, increased PT, PTT, D-dimer, and acute GI problems like diarrhea, vomiting, and abdominal pain, and elevated ESR more than 40 mm, elevated CRP more than 5 mg per DL, 5 mg per liter, or procalcitonin, and no other obvious microbial causes of inflammation like bacterial sepsis or staphylococcal or streptococcal toxic shock syndrome, and evidence of recent COVID-19 infection or likely contact with patients of COVID-19. So all these diagnostic criteria should be met. Now stepwise investigations in this multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. So unremitting fever of more than 38 degrees Celsius for more than equal to 3 days plus epidemiological link to SARS-CoV-2 plus clinical features suggestive of MISC. If all of these are present, we have to look for shock or life-threatening manifestations. If yes, then simultaneous Tier 1 and Tier 2 tests and workup for tropical infections like malaria, dengue. If no, then evaluate for alternate diagnosis and Tier 2 evaluation and workup for common tropical infections. If there is no life-threatening manifestations, only Tier 1 evaluation, and if Tier 1 screen positive, then go for Tier 2. And then if ultimately fulfills the diagnostic criteria, yes, then look for any of these: cardiac dysfunction or shock, coronary involvement, MODS, life-threatening conditions. No, rule out tropical infections. Yes, may start treatment depending on acuity of condition. If does not fulfill the diagnostic criteria, then also rule out tropical infection. So we have to just establish by ruling out. Now during the management protocol, there are 3 types of MISC. First one is MISC with shock or MODS, then MISC Kawasaki phenotype, and then MISC without shock. Now coming to MISC with shock or MODS, we have to start IVIG 2 gram per kg over 12 to 16 hours, maximum 100 gram, plus IV methylprednisolone 2 mg per kg per day, plus empirical antibiotics. If Kawasaki phenotype, then IVIG 2 gram per kg over 12 to 16 hours, plus IV methylprednisolone. If without shock, then IV methylprednisolone 1 to 2 mg per kg per day. If symptoms persist for 48 to 72 hours of treatment, or if there is early worsening, then in case of with shock or MODS, increase the steroid dose to 10 mg per kg per day, maximum 1 gram, plus consult specialist for biologicals. In other case, consult specialist for biologicals. In case of miss without shock, treat as per the phenotype to which evolution occurs. Now, what are the tier 1 tests? They are CBC, LFT, KFT, ABG, blood glucose, CRP, ESR, RT-PCR for COVID-19 and blood culture. When we will say it is positive screen tier 1 evaluation, CRP more than 5 milligram per liter and or ESR more than 40 millimeter per hour, and one of these absolute lymphocyte count less than 1000 per microliter, platelet less than 1,50,000 per microliter, sodium less than 135 milliequivalent per liter, less albumin, increased neutrophil. The tier 2 tests are just to make the final diagnosis of MISC, that is ECG, ECO, BNP, TROP-T, procalcitonin, PT, PTT, D-dimer, ferritin, fibrinogen, triglycerides, and also cytokine panel. Now, what is this MISC with Kawasaki phenotype? That means the features are almost like the Kawasaki disease. It is characterized by fever, conjunctival redness, strawberry tongue, red and cracked lips, rash, cervical lymphadenopathy, erythematous hands and feet. Always taper steroids over 2 to 3 weeks with clinical and CRP monitoring. Coming to COVID-19 in pregnancy. Now, pregnancy does not increase the chance of acquiring infection, but there are some factors in pregnancy which make the disease more severe. That is, pregnancy itself is an immunocompromised and hypercoagulable state, and there are respiratory changes in pregnancy. Number 2, there is increase in mortality rate, increased chances of hospitalization and ICU admission, increased risk of anxiety and depression. The virus is non-teratogenic, but it increases the chance of preterm labor and prematurity. Hence, all COVID-positive pregnant females are given steroids for fetal lung maturity. Now, risk factors in pregnancy for hospitalization due to COVID-19, third trimester, age more than 35 years, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, immunocompromised state. Most common symptom is cough, incubation period 5 to 7 days. Also remember, ICMR recommends 4 antenatal visits in this pandemic time, 12 weeks, 16 to 20 weeks, 28 to 32 weeks, and more than 36 weeks. Now remember, vertical transmission is now said to be present but rare. Why present and why rare? Because the virus could reach the fetus as a result of ischemic injury to the placenta. Ischemic injury to the placenta compromising the syncytial trophoblast barrier without placental cell infection. But the vertical transmission is unaffected by mode of delivery, delayed cord clamping, skin-to-skin contact, method of feeding and rooming in. So all these things, so mode of delivery is not influenced by COVID-19 infection. Delayed cord clamping, skin-to-skin contact, breastfeeding, rooming in, everything should continue as per protocol, even if the mother is COVID-19 positive. But why rare? Because ACE2 and TMPRSS2 receptors are minimally expressed in placenta. Now, what are the treatment protocols? If COVID-19 positive pregnant female, if asymptomatic and mild, go for home isolation, and after 2 weeks, the mother should undergo USG fetal surveillance for growth and amniotic fluid volume. Again, if moderate and severe, just like the management of adults guideline, but no specific antivirals are recommended. Mode of delivery not influenced by COVID-19 status. Now, the time of delivery, there is a bit controversy and some new guidelines regarding the time of delivery. First of all, if mild disease, with mild disease after 39 weeks, induction of labor should be done. If less than 39 weeks, wait. If severe disease, experts recommend delivery at more than equal to 34 weeks. Tocolytics should be avoided or must be avoided. Maxulf should carefully be used as it can cause respiratory depression. Unfractionated heparin is preferred to low molecular weight heparin in females who are near to deliver. Coming to COVID-19 in neonates, what are the COVID suspect neonates? So mother positive within 2 weeks prior to delivery, number 1. Number 2 is neonates born to a mother with a suspected infection or to a mother from containment area, postnatal exposure to infected mother or another person, and presenting with respiratory distress with or without fever and cough, onset beyond 48 to 72 hours of age, and no other alternate diagnosis. And positive means RT-PCR positive. Now, if the baby is COVID suspect and stable or COVID positive and stable, we have to look for the mother. Mother is not sick, then room in with mother in COVID postnatal ward and allow breastfeeding with droplet and contact precaution. If mother is sick, then shift the neonate to well baby COVID ward and give expressed breast milk. Now, if COVID suspect and the baby is sick or gestational age less than 34 weeks, shift to COVID suspect area of ward, SNCU or NICU. If COVID positive and gestation and the baby is sick, then shift to COVID positive area of ward, SNCU or NICU. And if any baby in the COVID suspect area test positive, then shift the baby to COVID positive area. Neonatal resuscitation should follow the standard guidelines, but endotracheal administration of medications should be avoided. In case of respiratory support, CPAP is preferred over NIPPV and HFNC. Intubation should be only for usual indications, and the area providing respiratory support should be negative air pressure area. Now, specific anti-COVID-19 treatment or any adjunctive therapy not recommended. Follow routine immunization policy. Now we have to discuss another important aspect, hyperglycemia, diagnosis and management of hyperglycemia at COVID care facility, because it has got some serious concern regarding mucormycosis and it has got a new guideline. So first we have to screen hyperglycemia. Now screening of hyperglycemia can be done by 3 steps. Step 1 is do a random CBG at the time of hospital admission. Step 2 is perform a pre-meal and 2-hour post-meal CBG with the first major meal at the hospital. Number 3 is send blood for fasting blood glucose and HbA1c next morning if facilities available. But remember, the whole guideline stands upon this step 2, pre-meal and post-meal CBG. Suppose the random CBG comes more than equal to 180 mg per dl, or pre-meal more than 140, post-meal more than 180, or fasting more than 110, HbA1c more than 6%. Monitor CBG at before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner and after dinner, so 4 times for at least 2 days, and start diabetic diet, because this first condition we can say it is not controlled. Hyperglycemia, it is not controlled blood glucose level. Now if the random CBG comes more than 250, or pre-meal more than 150, post-meal more than 200, or fasting more than 126, HbA1c more than 6.5, then we have to start drugs. It can be oral drugs, it can be insulin. Now we have said that all the guidelines are based on this pre-meal post-meal CBG. So pre-meal more than 150, post-meal more than 200, we have to initiate drug. But here are some catch. Pre-meal 150 to 180, post-meal 200 to 250. It is known as mild hyperglycemia. We can tell it as mild hyperglycemia. Pre-meal more than 180, post-meal more than 250. It is moderate to severe hyperglycemia. Now when we should give insulin? If there are contraindications to oral glucose lowering agents, or there is moderate to severe COVID, or there is moderate to severe hyperglycemia. Now what are the monitoring strategy? Even if initial blood glucose monitoring was normal, reinitiate CBG at 4 times before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner and after dinner for at least 2 days if the severity of illness increases, or if the patient is initiated on steroids. Monitor blood glucose at least twice a day, every 3 to 4 days in high-risk individuals. Who are the high-risk individuals? Individuals with cardiovascular disease, with obesity and age more than 50 years. So this is the monitoring strategy. So after step 1, step 2, step 3, if everything comes normal, we have to reinitiate. If severity of illness increases or patient is initiated on steroids, or if there are high risk individuals, we have to monitor blood glucose twice a day, every 3 to 4 days. Now coming to the guidelines. Newly detected hyperglycemia at admission. So if mild, newly detected hyperglycemia, mild means pre-meal 150 to 180 and post-meal 200 to 150 to 180 and post-meal 200 to 250. So newly detected hyperglycemia. Start tab metformin 500 mg BD plus 1 gliptin. It can be vildagliptin 500 mg BD or sitagliptin 100 mg OD or linagliptin 5 mg OD or tenagliptin 20 mg OD, provided that mild COVID symptoms, KF TLFT normal, patient is conscious, oriented and has good oral acceptance. Do not initiate pioglitazone or SGLT2 inhibitors in COVID patients. If patient is already taking them, stop these drugs if moderate to severe COVID. Now, in case of newly detected moderate to severe hyperglycemia, start on insulin. Now, start on insulin, the total daily dose is 0.4 units per kg per day, that is TDD. If age more than 65 years or CLD or CKD, it should be reduced to half, 0.2 units per kg per day. And this 0.4 units is divided in 4 doses. So 0.1 units each. 3 doses bolus insulin. Bolus means regular insulin. 30 minutes before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner. 1 dose basal insulin, that is NPH insulin, at bedtime or 2 hours after dinner. So it is known as bolus basal regimen. So suppose a patient of 60 kg of body weight, so total daily dose is 24 units. So 6 unit bolus insulin 30 minutes before breakfast, 6 unit bolus insulin 30 minutes before lunch, 6 units bolus insulin 30 minutes before dinner, 6 units NPH insulin at bedtime or 2 hours after dinner. So bolus, regular, basal, NPH. Remember, bolus insulin can also be adjusted to individual meals on next day, where the post-meal increment of blood glucose is more than 40 mg per dl. Post-meal increment means the post-meal CBG. Post-meal increment means post-meal CBG minus pre-meal CBG. If it is more than 40, if it is less than 40 mg per dl, then there is no need to add this bolus or regular insulin at all. And remember, basal insulin is adjusted as per fasting blood glucose. Now, known diabetic, the patient is known diabetic, already on oral glucose lowering agents. If it is well controlled, means pre-meal less than 140, post-meal less than 180, continue the same drugs. If hyperglycemia detected and it is mild, consult the endocrinologist for oral GLS optimization. If moderate to severe, start on insulin, again basal bolus regimen as above. Known diabetic, already on basal bolus insulin regimen, continue the existing regimen. Now, what are the indications of intravenous insulin infusion? The indications are: number 1, uncontrolled hyperglycemia despite the use of basal bolus regimen, sepsis with or without shock, hyperglycemia with erratic diet status, decay or HHS, emergency surgery or labor. The solution is made 50 units of regular insulin in 50 ml NS, so 1 unit per ml, and the infusion rate, one simple calculation, infusion rate, that is units per hour, equals to blood glucose divided by 100. It's a simple calculation, you can use it. But normal guideline is initiate IV infusion at a dose of 0.05 to 0.1 unit per kg and titrate the infusion rate based on magnitude of blood glucose change in previous hour, insulin sensitivity or resistance, dietary status, concomitant medications, etc. The target blood glucose is 140 to 180 mg per dl, which can be relaxed up to 220 mg per dl. And the target rate of blood glucose change is 50 to 100 mg per dl per hour. Now, the initial dose of insulin for a steroid-induced worsening of blood glucose is steroid-induced worsening of blood glucose. If no previous diabetes, 0.2 units per kg per day, 0.1 NPH morning, 0.1 regular before lunch. On 1 or 2 oral, the patient is already on 1 or 2 oral glucose lowering agents, and there is steroid-induced worsening of blood glucose. The dose is 0.4, 0.1 NPH plus 0.1 regular insulin, BBF, BL, BD each. On more than 2 oral GLS, the dose is 0.6, half is NPH, half is regular. So 50% NPH, 0.2 on morning, 0.1 in evening, 0.1 regular BBF, BLBD each. And if already on insulin, more than 0.6 units per kg per day, 1.2 into patient's insulin dose. So 20% extra should be given. So that 120% should be divided as 50% NPH, 50% regular. This is all about hyperglycemia. Last one is some anesthesia guidelines. Elective surgeries in a COVID patient can be planned for asymptomatic or mild patient 4 weeks from date of diagnosis. For symptomatic patients not requiring hospitalization, 6 weeks from date of diagnosis. For symptomatic patients requiring hospitalization or immunocompromised, 8 to 10 weeks. And for patients admitted in ICU, 12 weeks from date of diagnosis. Remember, maximum contamination to anesthesiologist occurs during reversal or extubation because the patient coughs at that time. So that's all about my notes regarding COVID-19, an integrated session. Hope you like it, you enjoyed it, and hope it comes to some help to you. Thank you.